I remember being a little girl playing with my friends in the streets of Manila, the capital city of the Philippines. We would make up rules to an imaginary game. We would play and laugh a lot. The streets were loud and messy, flanked with half-finished flats. Back then, I had no idea that people on the outside, looking in, would label my family poor. All I knew was that when I grew up, I wanted to change the world. I was 3 years old. Fast forward 3 years later, and I was playing in a beautiful house overlooking the Indian Ocean in Western Australia. By then, my mum had met my Aussie dad, who married her and took us there, and it looked very different to the poverty in which I was born. And as I'd be quietly playing, she would often come up to me and ask, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Even at 6 years old, I could tell that it was a bit of a test. The nudges were subtle, but I could feel a choice was being created for me between making a living and making a difference. And so instead of saying what I really thought, I took a look around and I said, I want to make enough money to live like this. So when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. And so when I grew up, I went to law school. But the dream wasn't dead though, because I wanted to be a human rights lawyer so that I could help people in poverty who didn't have the same opportunities that I had. I studied a law and arts degree majoring in politics and philosophy, and I loved it. But something happened. I started noticing that my peers' ambitions weren't around changing the world, but around making lots of money. Whenever we would talk about graduate clerkships, we would rank the firms based on their starting salaries. The most prestigious ones were the ones that paid the most. The least were the ones that didn't. And careers that helped other people paid even less, and so they were dismissed. And again, a choice was being created. When I graduated, would I become a greedy capitalist with all of the money, or a starving humanitarian that saved the world? Because I couldn't do both. So I chose money. And in my second year of law school, despite really loving it, I quit my politics and philosophy degree and took up a degree in commerce. And that decision marked a 10-year career punctuated with money, status, prestige, and intense feelings of self-loathing. Over 6 years, I would work in corporate and banking law after I graduated and got top-tier clerkships. What that meant was my primary goal was creating wealth for investors. My corporate career crescendoed in the bowels of the most capitalist institution invented by man, the listed fund manager. Over 18 months, I would lead over 40 deals worth over $3 billion. And at 32 years old, I would be the youngest senior executive appointed onto the leadership team. Now, on the outside looking in, it looked like I had won the professional lottery. But on the inside, I felt like a fraud. Yes, I loved how business could work to generate so much money that had the power to transform people's lives. But yet, the way that I was seeing traditional business work was that it was actually causing social problems, not fixing them. Things like cutting costs and having environmentally damaging practice, just so that we could save on costs by making people redundant, which would make investors richer, but at the expense of other people. It was a mindset that chased personal wins over community balance. I wanted to grow up to have a career that valued generosity, but then ended up in one that valued greed. I wanted to grow up and help other people, but by winning the professional lottery, I ended up helping only myself. I was so conflicted that at the height of my corporate career, I quit my job without another one to go to, because I was done choosing profit over purpose. And I didn't do it any sooner because I was afraid. I didn't see anybody taking a different career path. Did that signal that my choice was wrong? And what if I never made that kind of money ever again? Or worse, what if I failed and they laughed at me? But 1 year after quitting my corporate job, I was approached by the board of Grameen Australia, and they asked me if I would become their CEO. I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. Instead of failing, with that offer, all of my professional dreams were coming true. And to understand why, you need to understand the origins of Grameen Australia. It's an independent not-for-profit with charity status, fashioned on the ideas of a man named Professor Muhammad Yunus. In the social enterprise world, Professor Yunus is a rock star. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for lifting an entire starving nation out of poverty. Many call him the Bangladeshi Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela. And yet what he did was really simple, and it started with just $27. Where it started was in Bangladesh during the revolution. See, despite teaching traditional economics at university, when he went out into the real world, Professor Yunus would see people dying of starvation in the streets. The job market was decimated, and there was no money to go around. These people were so poor that they didn't qualify for bank loans, and traditional economics wasn't helping them. And the people that he saw were mostly women. They would have little businesses making bamboo furniture, where they would sell it to the market. But in order to do this, they needed to have money to buy the bamboo. But they were so poor that the banks wouldn't give them a loan, and they had no choice but to go to loan sharks, who would charge them crazy high interest rates. So it meant that once they sold their furniture, paid back their debt with interest, they had no money left over to feed their families, educate their kids, and get ahead. So Professor Yunus decided to try an experiment. See, the banks thought that poor people didn't have the character to pay the money back, but he did. He believed that it wasn't the character of poor people that stopped them from repaying, but rather the design of the system itself. And so his solution was to redesign the system. He would lend them small amounts of money from his own pocket so they wouldn't have to go to loan sharks. And so that meant, because he wasn't trying to make a profit from them, his interest rates were reasonable, and when they sold their furniture, made a profit, paid the debt back with interest, they had enough money left to get ahead. And instead of losing all his money by backing these women, they paid him back at a rate of 100%. This financial innovation is known now as microfinance. And what started out as $27 between 42 women has become $27 billion across 10 million people, with worldwide repayment rates of 97%. And this program has become known as Grameen Bank, the bank for the poor. And it's the only company in the world to have won a Nobel Prize. When we think about changing the system or advancing a social cause, we often think we'll start a charity. And charities do amazing work, but without a pathway to sustainability, they all face a common problem. Where does the money come from if donations run out? But Professor Yunus didn't start a charity. He started a viable business, and future funding came from the design of the business itself. Borrowers would repay their debt with interest, which meant that that could be reinvested into more loans to help even more poor people get out of poverty at scale. But unlike traditional business, this business, when it made a profit, it wouldn't go up to investors to make them richer, but rather be injected back into the business to solve the social problem. So what this tells us is that everything we know about business is wrong, or at the very least, incomplete. We think that business is just a tool to make money, but it is so much more than that. At its core, business is just an organising tool to achieve a concrete goal. And yet we think the only goal worth chasing is profit, expressing only the selfish side of human nature. But what about the generous side, the caring side, the selfless side? Why don't we design businesses that express those higher order qualities? Well, Professor Yunus did, and this microfinance program is an example of a different business, a social business. Now, social business has 7 principles. It has to solve a social problem. It has to make a profit and not a loss. Unlike traditional business, all profits go back into solving a social problem instead of making investors richer. And unlike traditional charity, where donors never get their money back, in a social business, if you put money in, you can get up to 100% of your money back, but no more, like Yunus did. It has to have the same as or better pay and working conditions as normal business. It has to have gender equality and be environmentally friendly. And finally, you've got to do it with joy. I was overjoyed when I was asked to lead Grameen Australia. And of course I said yes, because finally I didn't have to make a choice between profit and purpose. I could do both. Social business offers both. And instead of being a starving humanitarian, I was actually paid a market wage to help other people. And instead of feeling like a fraud in business, I could deploy the power of business to change the world. Professor Yunus says that poverty isn't created by the poor, but rather the systems we design for ourselves. I believe this to be true. Yes, profit-generating business can create wealth, and it can create jobs and lift people out of poverty. But if taken to a one-dimensional extreme, this relentless pursuit of profits can become dangerous. It can become greed. Oxfam released a report in 2016 saying that the top 62 wealthiest people in the world had the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50%. In 2017, just 1 year later, that number shrunk to the top 8 billionaires. How is that possible when business as usual is meant to be the great equaliser? Because that shows that the gap between rich and poor is growing, not shrinking. But if business caused this problem, if humans cause this problem, and surely humans can fix this problem. The only thing stopping us from changing the world is our imagination. The only difference between little kids in the streets of Manila playing rules and making up rules to an imaginary game and adults doing it is that adults forget that we can change the rules. So let's change the rules by upgrading our mindset, starting with how we think of business, charity, and our role in the world. Professor Yunus's vision is a world of 3 zeros, a world of zero poverty, zero unemployment, and zero net carbon emissions with social business, to redesign a new form of capitalism that values altruism and generosity just as much as it does financial gain. And in Grameen Australia, we share that vision too. Our goal is to embed social business as a viable alternative to charity and government in permanently solving social problems in Australia. And we aim to do this by developing social businesses and causing established institutions like corporates and governments to do the same. Examples of social businesses on our platform are Assisted Outing. They're an online platform that connects people with disabilities to local activity partners so that they can go on private outings anywhere in the world. Or All the Wild Roses, which is a fashion label that makes beautiful clothes with vintage fabric. It reduces waste and unemployment by letting unskilled people earn a living and learn a craft, and I'm wearing them right now. At Grameen Australia, we aim to cause a systems change, and if we succeed, it looks like this. As many, if not more, social businesses as charities. Corporates creating social business divisions instead of foundations. Governments at all levels funding social businesses. Universities having social business units, degrees and MBAs. And mums and dads funding social business just the way that they do charity. And if we do this, Grameen Australia will dissolve because we would have left in place a lasting model for solving this nation's greatest challenges. Now, as young people deciding on how to choose between making a living or making a difference, know this. You don't have to choose. You can have both. Social business offers both. You don't have to have the career paths, the traditional ones that your parents and grandparents had and chose for you, because the world that you're growing up in is vastly different to the one that they did. The problems are different, and if Oxfam's right, the problems are growing. The idea of social business is new, but there are many examples that show that it works, and we need more examples so that nations and corporates can take this seriously as a viable model for making social change. Perhaps instead of asking yourself, what do I want to be when I grow up? Why can't we ask ourselves more higher order questions? Who do I want to be when I grow up? How can I play a role in building the kind of world that I want to live in, rather than surviving in the world that I inherited? The world doesn't need any more ambitious lawyers and fund managers. What it needs are ambitious leaders that can deploy their considerable talents and passions towards solving the world's greatest problems: poverty, unemployment, climate change. Bold leaders that will create their own social businesses and dollar by social dollar create a system that advances all of humanity, not just 8 of us. And if you do this, if you choose this, you just might be the generation that ushers in a world of 3 zeros. Thank you.